Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Unique Items. Today we're going to be going over a unique item which is not really something that you would use by itself, and it is called the Three Dragons Solid Mask. This one has some pretty interesting stats. It is a evasion energy shield item, so as you can see it has evasion rating and energy shield, which, I mean, evasion's good for everybody, but energy shield maybe not so much if you're not building energy shield. 40 to 60% increased evasion and energy shield on the item, as well as 10 to 20% all elemental resistances, which of course elemental resistances does not include chaos resistance, womp womp, but it is still very nice to have 20% to all elemental resistances on a helmet. The real meat and potatoes of this item comes down to the special effect, which is a conversion of the way that your abilities proc effects. So in this particular game, if you dish out fire damage, you always get ignite. There is always a chance to ignite a target, and also potentially building up to it ignite on like a boss or something like that. It also contributes to your ignite magnitude, which means that you have a higher amount of damage. If you are dishing out, like a high amount of fire damage, you get a higher ignite, right? So the more fire damage you do, the better. Well, with this particular ability, or this helmet, it's now going to convert all of your fire damage from hits instead of into ignite. It's now going to contribute to your shock chance instead. Your cold damage is going to convert from freeze and chill to igniting targets, and your lightning damage is going to convert from shocking targets to freezing targets. And this is like a very interesting helmet for some particular reasons. Well, first off, it allows you to add whatever effect you want to whatever ability you want. So like, say for instance you were using explosive shot, which is primarily a fire damage ability, or like explosive grenade, which is primarily a fire ability, and you wanted it to shock targets instead for some reason, well, you could potentially do that. Or maybe you want a cold ability to, ignite targets instead, which would be very interesting. But there's some very odd connotations with this item. Now, generally, I don't think you use this item by itself. And we'll go over some of the other items that you're going to use with this and talk about why you would want to use this. So, the flavor text says, "The ice seared his naked feet as the lightning stilled his heart, but it was the flames upon his lover's face that roused him to vengeance from the Three Dragons by Victorio of Sarn." So what are the other items that you could potentially use with this? Well, there is the Whisper of Brotherhood ring, which is the sapphire ring that is 100% of cold damage converted to lightning. There is the Call of the Brotherhood ring, which is 100% of lightning damage converted to cold. There is also the Blue Flame Bracers, which is 100% of fire damage converted to cold. And I'm pretty sure there's a third ring, which I'm missing, the Ruby ring, which probably converts 100% of lightning or cold into fire. I would assume that since this one is 100% of fire to cold damage, it's probably 100% of fire. Well, actually, no, it would be the other way around, wouldn't it? It would be 100% of one element to fire. Although there is a fire conversion on the board, too, that also probably needs to be talked about here, and that's Avatar of Fire, which is 75% of damage converted to fire damage, and you no longer deal any non-fire damage. So this is also another way that you potentially convert all the other elements, so lightning and cold, into fire, which is definitely interesting. So you don't even do physical, you do nothing, you just convert everything to fire with this particular ability. So where does the Three Dragons come in with this? Well, the Three Dragons comes in with this by allowing you to gain the freezing, igniting, or shock effect with the appropriate ability that you're looking for. So let's say, for instance, you were utilizing 100% of cold damage converted to lightning damage, right? So now you have 100% cold damage converted to lightning. You're no longer dealing cold damage. If you don't deal cold damage, you don't freeze things. But you still want to freeze things for some reason. Well, the Three Dragons Mask has got you covered because it's going to convert your ability to freeze into lightning damage. So now lightning damage is going to contribute to your freeze buildup instead of cold damage, which means that now all your lightning attacks will in fact freeze. Let's say you were utilizing the blue flame bracers, which converts all of your fire damage into cold. In this particular case, you can now no longer ignite things because you now no longer deal fire damage, which means that technically you can now no longer benefit from any kind of ignite bonuses. However, if you utilize the Three Dragons Mask, in this particular case, you can take the cold damage from your hits and change it from a freezing effect into an ignite chance. Now, the downside of this is that it does actually, in fact, remove that from the original as well. So it doesn't just make it so that cold can contribute to fire, or ignite chance. What it does is it removes cold's ability to freeze targets. However, if you are dishing out multiple element types, like for instance, if you were cold lightning, you could now ignite and freeze because lightning will now freeze and cold will ignite. And the only thing you lose out of this equation is the ability to shock, which is maybe not a big deal to you. It really depends on what it is you're looking for. And I can kind of show you how this mask works by utilizing various abilities. So one of the abilities that we're going to utilize is Solar Orb. This is a pretty easy one to play around with in terms of igniting targets and freezing targets and things like that. And I can show you how it swaps the ignition to other elements. So let's just go somewhere. Doesn't have to be anywhere specific. Just somewhere with lots and lots of monsters. The Dreadnought is actually a really good place with tons and tons of monsters. That'd be kind of fun. Let's go to the Dreadnought. Alright, so if I utilize my ability, Solar Orb, Solar Orb has the chance to ignite targets, right? So all the monsters nearby can be ignited, right? So we have them igniting. And let me go ahead and kill these guys real quick because they're in my way. Alright, so we can ignite targets with Solar Orb. However, if we put the Three Dragons Mask on, what it's going to do is it's going to change our cold damage into an ignite chance, and now we basically will have no chance to ignite the target. So Solar Orb will no longer ignite the target at all. It's actually like a straight up negative. However, Solar Orb will instead, as you can see here, shock the targets. So now the targets are getting shocked by Solar Orb, which is not exactly what we were looking for. Now, if you were to utilize some other items with this, like say for instance you wanted to make a Solar Orb which burned targets but did cold damage, you could potentially utilize things like the Blue Flame Bracers. So utilizing the Blue Flame Bracers with this, you can change Solar Orb into an ability that now freezes targets with its fire. Sorry, not freezes targets. Yes, freezes targets with its fire, which is exactly what we're looking for. So for instance, in this particular case, I'm going to use Solar Orb, and we should see cold buildup. So the monsters are slowly starting to freeze. And as they freeze, boom, there we go, now we've got them frozen. We can, of course, shatter them, which is neat. But the problem with this is that, well, they're no longer burning, right? So I've converted the fire damage of Solar Orb into cold, but I've lost Solar Orb's ability to ignite the targets, which is kind of a big issue. Now, if I want to get that back, the Three Dragons Mask allows me to do that, because now it converts my cold damage into an ability to ignite, and so now I am igniting the targets with Solar Orb yet again, but instead of dishing out fire damage with my ignite, I am now dishing out cold damage with my ignite, which is just a very weird way to do things. And you might be wondering, well, how do I know if it's actually dishing out cold damage or if it's just dishing out fire damage? Well, it states it on the panel. So let's take a look. So Solar Orb, click here, go to Ignite, and you'll see total damage 987, cold damage 987. So we are now dishing out cold damage as Ignite instead of fire damage as Ignite by utilizing this specific combination. And you can utilize this in various ways. Like say, for instance, you wanted to use lightning damage to freeze targets. Well, that's super easy. Now all of your lightning damage abilities will freeze targets. You could potentially also go another route, which is where you convert your cold damage into lightning damage, or rather, your lightning damage into cold damage, which is the other way around. So the Call of the Brotherhood Topaz ring is going to convert all of your lightning damage into cold damage. You would have a lightning attack that now freezes targets, right? Well, if you utilize this helmet, again, we could change it so that your lightning attack, which is now dealing cold damage, is making the monsters ignite. Yes, it gets really complicated and actually very interesting when you start playing around with these conversion items. And there's even more on top of that. So there's also other fun things that you can potentially do. Like, you could potentially use this just to shift all the elements one way. So, for instance, instead of your cold, freezing, now your lightning freezes. Instead of your lightning shocking, now your fire shocks. And instead of your fire igniting, now your cold ignites, and so forth and so on. And maybe you want to do this because maybe your primary damage type is cold, and you want maybe your magnitude to be based off of your cold damage instead of your fire damage, which is interesting. It's a whole nother, calculation, right? Which is actually kind of neat, because if you were focusing on cold damage and you wanted to also focus on ignite, you could potentially do that by utilizing this item. There's also items like the Painter's Servant Torn Gloves, which split your damage elementally equally across all your elements, and function very oddly with the Call of Brotherhood rings and stuff like that. I don't know what's going on, which could potentially allow you to do 2 damage types at the same time. Despite the fact that you have the conversion. So, take, for instance, Explosive Shot, which is currently doing Fire, Cold, and Lightning. If I put the gloves on, it splits all my damage between the 3 equally, right? However, if I utilize something like the 100% of cold damage converted into lightning, you notice the cold leaves my tree entirely, which is interesting. If I put on the Painter's Servant gloves, you notice the cold comes back. I don't really know exactly what to think about that. It basically seems to be bypassing the conversion of the ring. I mean, there's so many fun little combinations that you could potentially do here between all these items. You obviously have the ability to convert your ignite into cold. You can make your lightning freeze. You can make your fire damage shock. You can convert your 100% of your lightning into cold damage. You can convert 100% of your fire into cold damage. You can convert 100% of all of your damage into fire with the passive that I showed you guys earlier. And you can also potentially utilize the Call of Brotherhood ring to convert 100% of your cold into lightning. And this helmet is kind of at the center of it all. Because it allows you to control more freely what it is that you're getting. The negative of this helmet being that you lose whatever it is that you're also trying to go into. So in this particular case, if you are trying to obtain that ignite chance, you lose the CC of freeze. If you do want to get the freeze on your lightning ability, you do unfortunately lose the ability to shock targets. If you want to grab the ability to shock targets on your fire ability, then you also lose the ability to ignite. Now, the interesting thing is if you're doing multiple element types, it doesn't really matter. For instance, right now, I'm currently dishing out 2 different element types. So I currently have cold and lightning. Oh, actually, all 3, technically. So even if I am losing my ability to freeze on cold damage, I've now gained the ability to freeze on lightning damage. So the monsters are still going to freeze, which is going to be very clear. So if I go to an area real quick, let's just go anywhere. And let's go to Azog Bog. There's a lot of monsters here. And I try to shoot targets. You'll see that they'll still shatter with the helmet on. So I'm still getting the ability to freeze the targets because I'm dishing out multiple elements. On top of this, let's say, for instance, I converted all of my damage to something else. Let's say I took away my ability to freeze entirely. So I want to convert away all my cold damage. So we're going to convert all my cold damage to lightning. So I no longer have cold damage at all. Well, because my lightning is now contributing to freeze and not my cold, then I still freeze. It doesn't matter. I'm still getting the freezing effect because I'm still dishing out lightning damage, and it still seems to work out just fine. And a lot of the times with this particular helmet, depending on how you kind of work the equation, you're definitely going to be able to get some interesting outputs here. Another interesting side effect of this particular helmet is that you can apply the magnitude of whatever element that you want. I know I kind of briefly touched on that, but if you are dishing out more of one particular element type, you can use that to focus your magnitude of that specific element onto an enemy. And in this particular case, you can clearly see that, like, if I'm using the 100% cold to lightning, lightning now becomes one of my strongest abilities, dishing out the largest amount of damage. I could also go the other way and convert 100% lightning to cold, and I could get a rather large amount of cold damage as well, getting a larger magnitude on, say, my ignites, which could also be interesting. This would give me a very interesting high amount of, ignite damage when I'm hitting a target. And let me see if I can ignite a target without killing it. Most of the monsters here are too weak for me to do that with, unfortunately. Let's see. As you can see, he got ignited with a rather large magnitude ignite, despite the fact that it was not it was not fire damage. It was cold damage, right? But that doesn't matter, because when it comes to ignite magnitude, or rather the damage output of ignite, it's really just based on how much the damage was when it hit. And since cold is now assuming the ignite magnitude, then having large amounts of cold damage is going to increase your potential ignite damage. So like right here, you can see that I'm currently at 2,888 ignite damage per second. Let's let it switch over to cold, because cold definitely has a higher number. I'm using elemental conflux, and elemental conflux switches my element types between. I should have, that's lightning, so let's go to cold. Come on, cold. You can do it, you can do it. Of course, it goes straight to fire, which is not what we want. It might have already been on cold, actually, now that I think about it. Interesting. He's doing this on purpose just to spite me. It went back to fire again. So it changes every 8 seconds, and every single time it changes, it kind of flashes the next element that it's going to potentially run. So it's going right back to lightning, and it's just doing it over and over again. Okay, alright, fine. Just do that then. You can get some pretty high numbers, though. As you can see here on my panel, I've got, like, Plasma Blast has a 80,000 cold damage at the moment, because I'm converting all the lightning to cold. And then on top of that, there you go, it finally switched over to the cold elemental conflux. And you can see I have 130,000 cold damage. And the main hand ignite chance now is 26,176 ignite damage, which is pretty beautiful. It's actually, that's a lot of freaking ignite damage, right? So in this way, you can use abilities like Plasma Blast, which is a very high amount of elemental damage, force it into a extremely high ability, like as far as damage is concerned, then get that damage to ignite the target, and the ignite magnitude will just be absolutely insane, right? So just another interesting way that you can potentially do things. I think overall this helmet is definitely a fun one to have, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to be playing around with it, trying to corrupt it and get some good stats on it, looking for those 20 all-res versions, and upgrading it to the moon, because this one's just too fun not to play with, at least. Just a helmet that you definitely want to have in your stash and play around with on various characters. Anyway, as always, I appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we're just talking about the Three Dragons Solid Mask, and as always, keep watching.